City of Salem, January 9th, 2019, continuation of a joint public hearing of the City Council and the Planning Board. A continuation of the joint public hearing of the Salem City Council and the Planning Board was held in council chambers on Wednesday, January 9th, 2019 at 7 o'clock p.m., 7:02 p.m. for the purpose of continuing discussion on an ordinance to amend an ordinance relative to zoning by adding a municipal and religious adaptive reuse overlay district to facilitate the appropriate reuse of eligible buildings and thereby protect and advance the general public welfare within Section 8.0, Special District Regulations by adding Section 8.7, Municipal and Religious Reuse Overlay District. The ordinance amendment includes Sections 8.7.1 through 8.7.11, outlining respectfully purpose, location, eligibility, dimensional requirements, uses allowed by special permit, site plan review, historical commission, and design review board review, affordability, parking and loading, conflict, and severability. The ordinance amendment provides a tool to allow for reuse of eligible buildings that will best serve the community, but will minimize impacts to surrounding neighborhoods while also facilitating historic preservation, economic development, housing production, and environmental sustainability and resilience. Notice of this meeting was posted on December 17th, 2018 at 8:49 a.m. All city councilors are present. Councilor Steve Dibble presided. Also in attendance, let me ask, I asked the, I'll go around. We have, from the planning board, we have Bill Grissett, Kurt Rader, Matt Smith, Carol Hamilton, Helen Sides, Matt Vino, and Ben Anderson. Did I get everybody? I think that's everybody. Okay. Also in attendance tonight, we have the mayor, I don't see any other department heads here. Members of the planning department to help us. I'm not sure if our city planner is joining us a little bit later, I think. Amanda? Yep. Okay. As part of the record, we have received correspondence from Historic Salem, Inc., Alice Merkel, the Planning Department, Barbara Cleary, the Chair of the Historic Salem, Inc., Preservation Committee, and Beth Depsky of the Partnership, Polly Wilbert, Margaret Toohey, and Maura Schoch. And I've been asked to read only one of these letters into the record, which, thank goodness, only one. There's a lot of letters here. So let me do this really briefly, really fast. To the Salem councilors and the planning board, I regret that I cannot attend tonight's meeting. I request that my comments be read into the record. I applaud the planning department for revising the proposed zoning now conforms to the National Trust Model ordinance except for density. The importance of the underlying zoning governing any new construction is incorporated in the latest draft of the ordinance. It now reflects the intent of the National Trust document. However, the standard of minimum lot area per dwelling unit for existing buildings does not. It should be appropriate to the neighborhoods in which the overlay properties are located. There is no district in the city where residential density is not regulated. 500 square feet when new construction is also taken into account is totally unacceptable and inappropriate. 3,500 square feet, which is the standard in R3 and NRCC, should be the minimum lot area per unit, resulting in appropriate numbers of units where the ordinance properties are in residential and sometimes historic districts. As has been consistently requested by a number of people, I also urge that the ordinance be changed to require affirmative design review board and historic commission review and approvals. This is particularly important since the mayor has essentially said that the list we have is representative, and therefore the changes could affect many properties in the city not yet identified with potentially horrendous unintended consequences. I echo others in questioning why you should pass this sweeping ordinance when we have successful when we have been successful in converting historic properties in the past. And I note that despite representations to the contrary, this ordinance has nothing to do with affordable housing, since the housing proposed for the church properties will be at market with a 10% set aside for affordable housing. Thank you for your consideration. Best regard, signed Meg Tui. With that, if any councilors have any questions or concerns now, I'd like to turn it over to our planning department to update us on the revisions that were created over the last 4 weeks or so. There being none, Amanda, if you could just walk us through the changes, and we'll open it up for what I plan on doing here tonight, so you all know, is to entertain questions and comments from the city council members, followed by the planning board members, open it up from the public. We'll go around the room in this order for public comments, bring it back, and we'll determine what we do next at that point. Okay, Amanda, thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. As noted, since the joint meeting back in December, staff has made some changes to the ordinance. We do have extra copies of the updated ordinance here, so if members of the public want to follow along, you're welcome to grab a copy of this. Many of the concerns we heard at the joint public meeting were regarding new construction, specifically for the dimensional standards for new construction. And so with that, we heard those comments and taken it into consideration. We updated the table on page 2. If you follow along here, what we changed was for the dimensional standards of the lot coverage, setbacks, height, stories, and the distance between buildings to meet the dimensions of the underlying zone. I also want to note that we heard those comments back in December regarding the Historical Commission and Design Review Board and the folks that want that to have an approval rather than a recommendation. However, we still feel that it's important to have one approving body quarterback in the special permit. And so for that reason, we're still proposing that the Design Review Board and the Historical Commission provide a recommendation to the Planning Board. And that, again, it expands their purview beyond what they would normally have with the special permit. I'd also like to note that staff has had a chance to read these new public comments that was submitted in response to the changes. And a couple of the comments, as you read into the record, state that there's no district in the city where residential density is not regulated. So I just want to clear the record that the proposed dimensional table, this was modeled after B5. In the B5 district, the existing buildings, I'll read it, what it says here. In the B5 district, residential uses or mixed use within an existing building do not have a minimum lot area per dwelling unit, and that's what we're proposing here. And then new construction has that minimum lot area of 500 square feet per dwelling unit. So we're looking at, a standard that we currently have in the B5. It's not something that's new to the city. In closing, we believe this ordinance, again, is responsive to the council order to provide a clear permitting path for these properties. I'm happy to respond to any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a little difficulty with the last, not the last meeting, not the last first half of this meeting, but the last process that we had on a joint public hearing, where I received a couple of complaints where people tried to speak at the planning board section of the meeting when they were deliberating, and I had submitted, the day after we closed the public hearing, I had submitted a memo, and my fellow councilors are aware of this. I brought it to their attention a couple days ago. I had submitted a memo to the planning department asking that it go to the planning board for their consideration the very next morning. So both those instances, the public, including myself, were shut out of consideration, and I understand the public hearing was closed. But with that, we have a process where, and I don't have an answer to this, we have a process where the city council and the planning board have a great public hearing together with a lot of public input, and then we close the meeting, the planning board leaves and has a discussion with a recommendation coming back to us, and then the city council will reconvene and to take action. But what happens sometimes is the discussion that's happening in the planning board or within the council may be some new information that we're talking, new topics that we're talking that weren't really discussed in the public hearing here tonight. So I asked that tonight that the entire council members and the planning board, any issues at all are all for discussion here tonight. Let's get everything out for the discussion so that the public will be able to speak on any matter here tonight. For example, the Airbnb joint public hearing. The addition of R1 wasn't really discussed at the meeting, but yet the recommendation came back with an R1 recommendation to it. The city council didn't understand all the ramifications of that, and we decided to vote that off, to not follow your recommendation. So we didn't really know the entire understanding of that one recommendation in particular. I'm just picking on that one issue, but there's probably other issues as well. So let's talk about everything here tonight so that the public sitting behind all of us can weigh in on our comments and our ideas behind this whole thing. That's what I'm asking. So questions to Amanda. Councilor Torrio.
Thank you. It's read through you. To Amanda, the one thing here that still I have some concerns with are the parking requirement and municipal parking as an element to that. That really, as far as I can see, only is pretty much key to one property, but that's still a big issue. We've talked about the various garages. We have a study of capacity that's before us as well that was submitted to us from the traffic parking department. And my issue there, all the other facilities that we're talking about, whether it's Broad Street or Cleveland Road or any of those, they all have the availability of parking either as part of the property or parking that they can make arrangements for nearby that's private. But the concern here with, you know, especially where it relates to Hawthorne Boulevard, is that use, I have no problem with the density itself for that building, but I really don't want to put another 10, 20 cars to overwhelm the municipal garage. Because we've done this with a lot of other projects in the downtown, and we're getting pretty strained there. So that's a that's a real concern. I'd like to see some other kind of way of dealing with that.
Can I have a response to that, Councilor? I appreciate the opportunity to be heard on this. So I think the parking issue within the downtown is trying to mimic some of the B5 language, but the idea that we don't want parking garages on every corner, we want to take advantage of the public spaces that we have if we can to leverage needs where they may arise. There certainly is capacity in Museum Place Garage for sure. South Harbor, a little bit less, but still some. The times when we don't have garage space availability are October, busy weekends, and some busy weekends for South Harbor outside of October, and then snow emergencies. But other than that, there really is availability. I think the tricky part of trying to think about parking, and certainly when we think about that one site, and I think you're right, that's the one that Councilor McCarthy raised at the last meeting, is trying to design zoning, not even knowing what the use is going to be there. Like the process haven't even started. And that's why the site plan review is so critical, that you have a planning board who can weigh, maybe that's going to be in a senior housing, maybe that's going to be a condition of not enabling only so many cars. We don't even know how many units are proposed there. So it's tricky to take an overall zoning ordinance that you're looking to use. And I want to be clear, like there isn't another path really forward for these properties. That's the sense of urgency that we're feeling. They're old, they're historic, we want to preserve them. We know the church wants to dispose of them. We started this process in June or July. And to think about, well, what's going to go there and how are we going to address parking at that site? And that's why the zoning enables an opportunity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the planning board could not put additional conditions on that or address that. There'll be a public hearing, all of the abutters will be there. Obviously, it's a concern that I think needs to be wrestled with. But trying to solve for it without even knowing what's being proposed there. Maybe that's assisted living. Maybe that's some other use that doesn't have as much of a car-centric need.
The concern to it, though, is that having that in here, having what's in here, and really is pretty targeted, saying it must be less than 1,000 feet as measured in a straight line, municipal facility clause. If having that in there does give us an out, if it's if it winds up being a conventional facility there, just conventional apartments, lofts, or whatever, I would estimate, having looked at that site on the back, and I'm sure my colleague from Ward 1 probably has memorized every detail of that property, or most of them. The on-site parking is, in the two nooks that they have there, is probably maybe 15 spaces or so total, in two areas. And going beyond that, it's, you know, it gets difficult, so it's a real
Again,
concern for
so-
that particular piece of development.
Understood. I'm just suggesting that trying to solve that parking issue for that specific project, not knowing what the use is, what other arrangements there may be with the church or otherwise.
Sure.
And then trying to build that into an overlay. This is based on what we
Yeah.
have in the B5.
Well, of course,
but it
having this
doesn't-
overlay, though, having this as part of this overlay zone really only services that one property the way things are right now. Because you don't, unless I guess theoretically, it could work with the other, with the church on Washington Street as well, because that would be within 1,000 feet of the municipal parking garage as well. But it would be similar, there's only a couple places that are really touched by that.
Right. would
They
meet
have some
some-
parking on their site, but,
I just want to caution, this is designed to try and create a path to actually
Yeah, I
put
get
these
it. No, I-
buildings into productive reuse.
I get
There
that.
were
It's a
parking-
non-issue in almost all the other, in all the other church properties and the old senior center. It's a non-issue because of either on-site or available parking, whether it be Federal Street or Cleveland Road or wherever. Really the only place where it actually targets something is that Hawthorne Boulevard development and possibly, looking at the map, possibly Washington Street.
Correct, and I guess I'm aware of the concern, and I think it's something that will have to be dealt with as that project is permitted. There is some capacity in our garages. I don't want folks to think that there isn't any availability, and it could be that there's a condition that the parking must be met in one particular garage that has more availability. It could be that there's an opportunity to require on-site parking. The planning board still has the capacity to regulate that issue, even though there might be language that allows a certain subset to comply by using the public garages. That's the minimum, right? Not necessarily the standard. That doesn't mean that standard can't be exercised in a greater fashion.
Maybe for now.
Other counselors? Amanda, if you would, can you explain briefly, this whole ordinance is really designed to protect some of the historic schools that we have and to get them reused, which I think everybody in the room is in support of, if not 99.9% of everybody in Salem is in support of. But with that, and we want to protect these buildings, why isn't review required and approval required of the Historic Commission and the DRB? Can we add those? Your comments.
Again, staff's recommending that these be recommendations. I can't think of another permit in our ordinances that require two different bodies to approve the same set of criteria. So the planning board is going to look at the special permit criteria and get a recommendation from the design review board and the historical commission, but then you have one approving body saying either yes or no to that special permit. We just think it doesn't make sense to have multiple bodies looking at the same criteria and issuing approval for that. We have 9 members on the planning board who are, I might be biased, but I think they're absolutely excellent at what they do. And, I don't see the need to have a approval. I think it makes the process, it's just complicated.
Okay. Any other questions from counselors? I'd like to open up to the planning board members, please. Ben?
I have a couple quick brief comments, but I know Board Member Dino wanted to make a comment.
Just thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's more of a personal privilege, not related to the petition before you, but I know my absence from the first public hearing was a cause of a great deal of inconvenience to the city council, members of the planning board, and the public who had attended. So I just wanted to apologize for holding everybody up and inconveniencing folks.
Thank you for that.
Just a couple quick comments, or questions, Amanda. On page 4, under the special permit uses, specifically item 14, specialty food store. Is my understanding that convenience stores are allowed under that as well? Doesn't really say it. It says specialty food store, candy store, meat market, delicatessen, bakery, but not those who are serving consumption of food on the premises?
Let me check the definitions. I'll double check for you.
I guess my point would be just having a convenience to service these potential facilities and housing facilities. Convenience would help us from having to have someone get in a car and drive to a facility to have that convenience, I think would be important. The next quick comment I have is under 8.7.9, parking and loading. The parking requirements are clearly modeled after 5.1.9 Central Production District B5, which I agree with. One piece that I think is missing, and I'd like to be considered, was for projects and development under the Salem Housing Authority for elderly or handicapped. That parking requirement is 1/3 parking space per dwelling unit. I hate to see us ignore that opportunity for these facilities. You know, I know the city would like to develop handicap and senior housing, though that'll be dependent on state and eventually federal funding. But I hate to see us ignore that at this point. That's it.
Question, just clarification, Amanda, would the Housing Authority be exempt from this ordinance anyway, whereas their state? Would be non-applicable, I believe.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure if they qualify for the exemption, because technically they're not, they're a quasi-state agency. We can verify that. They may be
I
counted.
thought the only exception was with wetlands and the conservation. Every other state entity was exempt from our local ordinances.
Yeah, I just don't know if they qualify wholly as a state agency.
Let's look at, it's a very good recommendation. Let's look into it to see if it should be added or changed. Any other members of the planning board? Kurt?
I have 3 or 5 comments here. Starting with 8.7.1 purpose, there's a sentence that says, this overlay district provides zoning flexibility to allow for such redevelopment while also. It seems to me that those not in the room tonight for this discussion will be looking at this in the future, trying to interpret what the intent was. And when I read this, I read it as redevelopment first and very much secondary, all these other things that follow. And it seems like that could be easily changed to say this overlay district provides zoning flexibility for redevelopment concurrent with historic preservation, economic, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, agreement.
That's an easy one. Then I do have a question for the city. Is there a legal differentiation between parcels, lot, and property? Because lot seems to show up, and then buildings sometimes, it seems like it's swappable or interchangeable, but I'm not entirely sure. I would actually prefer to see the term property be applied throughout, because it's not always a building, it may be a parking lot. So I think that's an important distinction. On page 2, point number 5, public parks shall not. I would actually like to see that expanded to say public parks, conservation areas, and cemeteries shall be excluded from this ordinance. So I'm not entirely clear, are conservation areas always within a park? Are they always distinct from a park? And similarly with cemeteries, I think we ought to just lay it down very clearly that those are municipal properties, but they are not subject to redevelopment. In terms of 8.7.4 dimensional requirements, rather than just have a dash, I think it ought to clarify and say as exist or as existing, and then under fences and bordering walls, put in parentheses heat. And then further down, the paragraph that starts any rooftop construction. So there's a strike through of new construction, but my question is, does that then orphan the final sentence of that 3-sentence paragraph? For the purpose of this ordinance, the height shall not include steeple? Because if you're not,
Reverts back to the table, dimensional table.
right,
So you still need that.
okay.
Does that qualify what would be other dimensional?
I guess I was trying to piggyback on a comment from the previous meeting that was a little bit more explicit, that indicates that the height shall be measured to either the cornice or the gutter line, but not, but an adapted building shall not include habitable space above the ridge line. and thinking specifically about churches. You could conceive of changes to the facade or to the massing, but in no cases should it go above the ridge line. Clearly, it's not going to top out beyond the steeple. That's just something we ought to discuss. And then finally, on 8.7.7, the last sentence in that paragraph, the project in which a new detached building is proposed to be constructed, this paragraph shall apply to both the Historical Commission and the City of Salem Design Review Board. I think it marries up with what you were saying. Shouldn't it be any project? It shouldn't hinge upon whether it's detached or semi-detached. I think anything that makes a visual volumetric change or modification to an existing structure as well as a detached structure should go through review. And that is all.
Kurt, if you just clarify the sentence that you, in your previous issue, that you said that it would be orphaned, is that for the purposes of this ordinance sentence?
For the purpose of this ordinance, the height shall not include steeples or other ornamental features.
I'm in agreement. That sentence just doesn't really belong there anymore.
It did before, but
It did
less so
before, you're
now.
right. Good point. Amanda, is that sentence still needed in the ordinance? I think it's non-applicable now.
If the council and the planning board find it not applicable, we felt it, it doesn't hurt to be there in the event that someone wanted to apply for a variance for height or that sort of thing, to include it. But again,
But now we're
it's up to you
using
guys
the
if you feel it
underlying
doesn't.
zoning, so those rules will be in place instead of part of the rule that we're changing here. Okay. Any other planning board members with concerns or questions? No? All right. At this time, I'd like to open up to public comment. If you can be right to the point, we have a lot of people here possibly speaking. If something has been already said, please, just so you can agree with what has been said with that one person, so that we're not hearing the same thing 30 times, either agree or disagree with that person. So it doesn't matter. We're going to stay here as long as we need. We're going to start at this end side of the room and work our way around the room and take them in order. When you please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. So let's start here and go right around the room.
Hi, I'm Mickey Northcutt, and my address is 9 Northeast Street in Salem, and I am here as a resident, but also as the CEO of North Shore CDC, and just want to speak in support of the proposed ordinance. And in full disclosure, too, I wasn't here at the last time, but I think it might have been discussed that North Shore CDC is working to redevelop the schools on Federal Street and Hawthorne Boulevard. And it's extremely early in the process. We don't really have any detailed plans with that, and partially because we don't have full site control of the site of the buildings yet, but also because we wanted this process to be able to play out so that when we go through that planning process, we will know like what zoning is in place or not in place when we go that route. I just want to note that when we have done projects, especially projects that are either new construction or like these, converting from one use to the other, it's critical to us to have a neighborhood planning process that happens long before we go through actual permitting. And, we frankly didn't even want to get too heavy into that process before this issue is resolved, because we want to know exactly like what the zoning parameters would be. We did have one meeting with the Federal Street neighborhood and the folks that live near that Federal Street church, and it was really positive, and we had really good feedback. I think like you said, folks really want to see that school preserved, and that's our goal too. We bid on the right to develop those two schools because we would really love to preserve the historic architecture there, and our goal would be to make affordable housing subject to much more planning. Like in all likelihood, we would be doing housing for elderly families. So I'm happy to answer any questions if people want to ask, since we actually are a developer that would be doing something that would be relevant here, but I don't know if that's appropriate, but I just want to make sure people know that I think in this case for us, we view this as like on balance a positive thing, because it gives us guidance on how to approach these sites with still allowing the neighborhoods to have input to create something that's like relevant in the neighborhoods. I mean, that's what we would want anyway, whether we were going with an ordinance like this or other possibilities.
I'll entertain opening up to questions of the planning board or the city council. Council Milo.
Thank you, Mr. President, through you. Mickey, when we see you, I think you are the face of affordable housing, no question about it. So when you stand up here before us and you talk about developing these properties, and we've had discussions about, well, these properties are just going to be developed as, you know, market rate with 10% affordable. Yeah. Can you, with any confidence, tell us that that's what's going to happen is different, that the properties that you're interested in are going to end up affordable for the majority, for the most part? Or do you expect that they're going to be, you know, market rate with 10%?
No, I could, if we're successful in doing them, I can tell you that they would definitely not be 10% affordable. They would be majority affordable, whether that's like 100% or, you know, some lesser percentage. I don't really know. I think we get feedback from all sorts of angles, right? And certainly our primary mission is, in terms of housing, is creating affordable housing, but also there's often a lot of desire to have mixed income communities and buildings. So it's something that we've thought about for those sites. But when I say mixed income, it would definitely still be a far majority of affordable, if not 100% affordable. And what would dictate that would be talking to the neighborhood and really like thinking about that. But also, so often when we are putting projects together, we are somewhat beholden to whatever funding programs are available. And sometimes those do have an effect of dictating who we serve. But in this case, that is more likely to push us towards 100% affordable than mixed income. Because frankly, it's easier for us to do it that way. So I don't have a definitive answer for you because we haven't really gotten there. But it definitely would be, if not all, close to all affordable. And I think we thought certainly for the, again, like we haven't gone through community process and we've only kind of played around with it, but I think especially the Federal Street site makes a lot of sense to have senior housing because it's right next to the senior center. Seems to make a lot of sense. Doesn't have to be. If anyone would want to live there, these are all like really nice sites, but certainly that would make, and frankly Hawthorne Boulevard is also a really great site for that because it would be great for folks that can't drive or don't want to drive to be able to still live in the downtown where they can walk to what they need. So that's a consideration for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions of the city council? Council Fury.
Mr. President, I strongly concur with Councilor Milo. You are the human face of housing in Salem. Your experience in Beverly, now in Salem. Every neighborhood has been touched. So this is a real human impact for all of us. Do you see your vision that these are high impact, high dense areas, Immaculate Conception, church, school itself, the old St. Mary's, St. James, very residential neighborhood, very historic neighborhood, being developed now, the old rectory, the convent's being developed now. Do you see any, from the skeleton itself of the building, do you see major impact up, down, an amount, or do you foresee living within the structure of St. James School, the Immaculate Conception School?
Oh gosh, living within the structures of the school, 100%.
You wouldn't think of building it like a steeple high. Some people had concern last.
No, we would. I can tell you with certainty we would not do that because in both of those schools we would want to use historic tax credits because that's a really great way to pay for the project. And those would, I mean, we wouldn't want to do that anyway because we would want to protect the historic integrity of the buildings, honestly. But setting that aside, like if we use historic credits, which we would be crazy not to, it would dictate that the exterior of the building be left intact. I mean, there are like minor circumstances where like little things could change in converting to residential, but like nothing like what you're talking about, like adding major stories or, you know, like the physical appearance of the building should be the same. And like, for example, I think in both of those buildings, they're in pretty tough shape. I mean, I know we're not just talking about those two buildings with this, but those are in, we've spent a good amount of time figuring out and just assessing what shape the buildings are in, and they're in really, I think that's a really good reason for what you're considering, because those are, you know, we've all seen those buildings for years and they're in decay, frankly, because they've been sitting there, not really taken care of at all, and they need everything. Very expensive to renovate those buildings. That's another consideration for us, is we just have to make sure that it's like feasible. But certainly residential is going to be a lot more feasible than anything else that a developer, I can't imagine what a developer would do in those schools if it wasn't apartments, honestly.
One more follow-up.
Please have the floor.
One more follow-up, if I may, and thank you for your indulgence.
Yeah.
Your leadership. Can you point to a building that you've done, your agency has done, or in the area, saying, this is what it may be like, that we can envision? Can you picture?
So we've never converted a school before. We've done lots of historic rehab. We've renovated 19 buildings in the Point, which were all using historic tax credits. And a lot of those buildings, some of them were ones that the CDC had owned for a long time, but a lot of them were ones that we bought from other landlords. And a lot of those had, how do I say this, like not been taken care of very well. And a lot of the that's an understatement for some of the folks that have had tours. But not aside from like the living conditions, a lot of the other like historic characteristics of the building had been butchered. So like, for example, you see things like metal front doors, and we would restore that with like the original, which would be like a solid wood. And we're restoring things like transom windows and putting in historically appropriate windows. And those seem like little things, but when you do that for 19 buildings and not like one, it starts to make a difference, really, and like how you start to look at it, the architecture differently. And those schools are, I mean, I think they're two of the nicest buildings in Salem. They're really beautiful. It's great. They're already in residential neighborhoods, and I think in the case of both, having apartments in there would be certainly not lower impact compared to a vacant school, but compared to a school, less traffic and foot traffic than a school would have, I think. But so I'm trying to think of, there's lots of schools that have been redeveloped into housing. I'm trying to think of a good example that's close to here. I don't know, I'm kind of looking at you. I feel like you would know. What's that?
Beverly.
I don't know of one that's already converted. Oh, actually, that's a great, the one right on Rantoul Street. The one, I forgot about that. It's been condos for so long. Yeah,
Edwards School on School Street? Edwards?
Yeah, the Edwards School. Thank you. I forgot about the name. That was like a little, maybe 15 years
The
ago.
Ballard School on Flint Street was converted to condos decades ago.
Oh, yeah. So it's super common. I mean, lots of developers have done it. I think it's really a common thing for cities to sell schools and make them into apartments, but we just happen to have never done that before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilman Madore.
Thank you, Mr. President, through you. Mickey, I attended that first neighborhood meeting that you mentioned with the Federal Street neighborhood, and you had proposed some different pathways for redevelopment of the St. James School to take place. And I was wondering if you had a chance to review the ordinance as it is written now before us, and what you think of it, and whether, without this, how would you proceed with redevelopment of the school itself?
I have read it, but I'm no expert in it, so no pop quiz. I think it's good. I think on balance, it just gives us like a framework. And I've said all along to that neighborhood meeting and otherwise that we would live with whatever comes out of the process, right? But I think if it were not to be in place, then the best path for us to get a project permitted would be through a friendly 40B, which would be a comprehensive permit. And that, simply because that's the only process available to us that I'm aware of. I don't think it's possible to get variances to turn those schools into residential. I don't think that's like legally possible. So it's really up to the city, right? I mean, I think for us, we've worked with a variety of different permitting processes over the years. We've worked on, I can tell you, the projects that I've worked on, we've had one that we got variances. This was in Beverly, but still. We've worked on 1, 2, 4 projects that used comprehensive permits in Salem, Beverly, and Gloucester. And 2 of those were really recent in Salem. Those were comprehensive permits, friendly 40Bs. And those are fine processes too, but I think my reaction to what the ordinance is, it's quite a bit more oversight. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's quite a bit more oversight than what the comprehensive permit process allows. Because that's one application to the ZBA and they get input from other boards, but like, you know, it's really all through the ZBA. We never even dealt with the planning board.
Just a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Would you say that this ordinance gives us more local ownership over the development process
Absolutely.
compared to the friendly 40B?
Oh gosh, without a doubt. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mickey, thank you for being here today, but I just want to clarify, at our, not the first half, but at our first meeting of this public hearing, we received 3 drawings that showed pretty large new construction on the 2 properties that you're now charged with. 2 different locations at the St. James property, very large buildings, and then 1 over at the Immaculate Conception parking lot. Can you touch upon briefly, will the lack of new construction in this ordinance affect you, or are you solely looking to rehab the existing building without any new construction on just your 2 projects?
So I didn't see what you were talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about. A building on the Immaculate Conception parking lot.
The large parking lot had a maybe 5-story building on it, as tall as the roof line of the Immaculate Conception Church.
You mean the one that's right on Derby Street?
Facing the church to the right, closer to Pickering Wharf.
Okay, so a couple of things. That is not on the table for us, at least, because when the Archdiocese did the RFP for those 2 schools, they didn't include that parking lot. They only included the school and what is a fairly small parking lot directly abutting the school, not the large. They want to keep the one to the right of the church. So like, let that myth be debunked. That's never been discussed at all. And I don't think you could fit any building on that little parking lot kind of behind the school. It's
the rendering that we saw showed.
Oh, I can imagine.
Units or so
Yeah, no, that's not even on the table. On the St. James, so no, our primary focus is redeveloping the schools as they exist. It was interesting. We had assumed, honestly, that was our assumption, that we would just be redeveloping those 2 schools. And in that meeting that Councilor Medora was talking about, we had a lot of questions about whether we were going to redevelop the parking lot, and that was also not a part of the Archdiocese's RFP. So we hadn't really spent any time really contemplating that. I don't want to say it would preclude it if, like, when we went through the community process, that was viewed as a positive addition to the site. Because personally, I think that parking lot needs some work and some help. And if there's a way to make it more attractive with some development, we would look at that. But that's really not our goal in the process. And our conversations with the Archdiocese have specifically been to not do that anytime in the foreseeable future.
The original start to this was without new construction, and new construction along the way was added to the ordinance, is my understanding. Or the initial request, rather, before we got to pen to paper on the ordinance. Any other questions from the councilors or from the planning board members? Mickey, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to continue on, going around the room. Folks, the acoustics out in the hallway are pretty poor. There's plenty of seats. If you want to come on in, you'll hear better. We're going to go around the room this way. State your name and address for the record, please.
Gary Gill, Ward 3, my attorney over here. So as I look through this tonight and glance through it, it seems like maybe all of the loopholes were taken care of. The thing that I still want to enforce and be adamant about is the two properties up on Lafayette Street, which is the old rectory and the old school, besides St. James. And as a matter of fact, the drawings and the renderings that you were talking about, Mr. Dibbles, was, Mr. President now, the drawings that we saw, even though they were just drawings to give you an idea of what could go there in the back parking lot itself, Mickey, it looked like the Queen Mary had landed there. So the drawings that we saw last time, they were pretty large. So I understand where you're talking about how high they really should go. Should they go up above the steeples? Because if they could, I'm sure they will. But for that residential area itself, try to keep that in mind, that it is still a residential area, even though the back half faces Bridge Street. And that parking lot could be developed into something else as well, plus parking. It's a very large lot. But just keep in mind that it is a residential area, and the height itself, I think the church sticks out pretty much by itself already, so I don't think you really want to go any bigger than what it is existing there. That's my hope. But the thing I really want to focus on and talk about, since Mickey is doing all the work down the point, and we're promoting the point and everything, and it is the point's time to shine. So I am going to be adamant about the rectory and about the old school for that street at that end to be finished off, to make that curb appeal for that whole intersection there really nice and affordable housing. So that is what I'm going to stick to my guns about, because if we're going to do mixed use on all these buildings and redesign and kind of have a brainstorm of what to come out of all of it, I'm really going to be adamant about that school and about that rectory. I mean, it's been sitting there for quite a long time now, and it's an eyesore, and all of you know it. And as much effort as you're putting into the point area, that is going to be the jewel of that little corner there and that whole community. It's going to make people want to go down that street instead of avoid that street. And when you go to look at the school, it's really in bad shape. Windows are literally falling out. I saw somebody put in plywood now recently. But a couple of the neighbors that live on that street were talking about the bell tower itself. The bell is still hanging there. And they noticed that the wood rot is really setting in, that they're thinking that that bell is actually going to fall through. Just keep that in mind, because if the bell falls all the way through 3 floors, you're really going to have a big problem. I think that's pretty much it, and I'll wait to hear what everybody else says about the loopholes and the ideas and how this got changed from last time to this time. It does look a lot better. So that's it.
Thank you. We're going to continue around. We're going to go right around the room here, then we'll jump back here. Actually, Mr. Carr, come on up. We'll keep in that same order.
Good evening, all. My name is John Carr. My wife and I have resided at 7 River Street since May 16th in 1973. I've been a lifelong resident of Salem. I served for 25 of the first 25 years of the Salem Historic District Commission. And while I was on the commission, I was principally responsible for creating each of Salem's historic districts. Since leaving the commission, no historic districts have been created. I don't take a backseat to anybody in this city when it comes to historic preservation. While I was on the commission, it's funny as I listen to we need this ordinance because there must be a clearer path. Well, during the 25 years I was on the commission, we rehabilitated the former Cogswell School, the former Phillips School. What few people tend to remember is there was a 1930s brick addition on Essex Street. That was demolished, freeing up the original building from the 19th century, and in its stead were the wooden buildings for handicapped housing. So somehow we rehabilitated the former Bentley School. We have rehabilitated any number of schools. The former administration, what is now the J. Michael Ruane, I can't even remember what the name of that grammar school was. Pardon me? The Oliver School. So when I hear that we absolutely need this ordinance as a clearer path, because the suggestion is that without it, there would be no renovation of historic schools, I gotta tell you, it's complete and utter bunk. It's disproven by the actual experience over the last 30 or 40 years. Now, since leaving the commission, I have represented the neighborhood, always on a pro bono basis, in connection with the former St. James Rectory, the former St. James Convent, 328, 330 Essex Street, the former Carolyn Emerton property, the former Gainsborough Studios. Councilor McCarthy and Councilor Sargent and Councilor Finn may be the only ones who know where I'm referring to. And in each case, what it meant was that the developer had to sit down with the neighbors and bargain and arrive at a solution that would be acceptable to both. And I think, besides the flawed premise of this ordinance, which is without it there can be no development of historic properties in Salem, is its principal failing. Because what this does is it assumes that there's a one-size-fits-all ordinance that who knows what the unintended consequences are, that essentially freezes out the neighborhood. Oh, sure, there are going to be opportunities at various boards, but you know what? The long and the short of it is it diminishes the role of the public. Now, as I look around the room, you all, this is like an academic exercise. I've been doing it. I've been doing it, in the case of some of you, longer than you've been alive. And I can tell you that the way it gets done, the way development gets done in a pre-existing built environment like Salem, is that kind of give and take. Is it perfect? No. No system ever is. It's like what Churchill said of democracy. It's a very poor form of government, but it's the best we've been able to come up with. There's so many specific flaws in this besides the premise, the number of properties, the idea that it includes things like Old Town Hall, that it includes, this very building. And you can't sort of dismiss them by saying, oh, they're the province of some other authority like the state, and therefore we have no control. We pride ourselves that this is the second oldest city hall, working city hall in the country after St. Augustine, Florida, I believe Councilor Fury has told me. We're not going to do that. And that kind of inclusion of fluff is another of its problems. So, can the ordinance be fixed? I agree with my predecessor. I think it has been improved. But we're not there yet by a long shot. And the great benefit of the system that has been in place for the last 46 years that I've been active in it is that everyone appreciates how it works. No one appreciates this ordinance No one understands it fully. And I'm graphically reminded of a situation involving this planning board, well, maybe its predecessor, in Salem Oil and Grease, where 6 councilors showed up at a planning board hearing. And they were the ones not interpreting a prior vote of the city council, but their own vote. And what was that vote? The vote was there had been a proposal to have a certain height restriction. And the then city planner, Lynn Duncan, had approached the council and had said, it's too inflexible. Let's make it a matter of stories. And the councilors had accepted that amendment. And they changed, I think it was 40 feet to 4 stories. At that meeting, 6 councilors who had actually voted on that change rose to say that the developer's proposal of 4 stories on top of a story of parking was not what they intended. But the non-elected planning board overrode the elected members of the city council. Believe me, it's lawyers like me, but for the developers, who will be parsing every syllable, not sentences, every syllable, to arrive at tortured meetings to get something done. And like I say, the system, I don't think, is broke, and because it isn't broke, and because it has worked, and whether you point to the Salem jail, the carriage house at the Salem jail, the new construction, even as we speak, across the street, the SRA is considering a proposal for 5 Broad Street. Every historic property in Salem is currently working its way through redevelopment. And at a minimum, the very idea that the Historic Commission, for a proposal that is supposedly driven by historic preservation, can only make recommendations is reprehensible. It's reprehensible. So, thank you for your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. I just want to point out that you missed several other schools. You also missed the East Branch Library and the South Branch Library. But I'd like to recognize our city...
North Branch, too.
Sorry, I only went to the other 2. I'd like to recognize our city planner, Tom Daniel, who arrived. I'm wondering if you can entertain us and respond to some of the concerns, whether there might be an easier path for getting these buildings reused.
Good evening, councilors. Happy to be here this evening. Sorry I wasn't able to be here in December. I was having some medical things that I was dealing with, but all is good. So, I've been briefed with Amanda for the past hearing and others. We've had a couple conversations with representatives from Historic Salem, Inc. Just in response to Mr. Carr's comments about why this is needed or not needed, believe me, if we felt that there was doing it the old way was the easier path, then that's what we would be doing. But I think I don't want to go project by project. I can't speak to all the projects that have been done over the 40 years that were adaptive reuses of historic properties. What I do know is that some of them were done under a different framework where use variances were granted by the city. So the city is not able to grant use variances. The city ordinance does not allow the granting of use variances. And so there was litigation that made it clear that a municipality cannot grant a use variance unless it allows it explicitly within its zoning ordinance. So that was a change maybe in the mid-2000s. So I think that speaks to a number of the school projects that had been done previously. So I think that's the crux of what Mr. Carr was saying, that the premise for this ordinance is flawed, and I would counter that in saying that in fact it's needed in order to allow particularly 5 Broad Street, which is a municipal property the redevelopment authority is going through, yes, is working through the disposition process, but as we stated in the request for proposals, that we would need, that we were contemporaneously in parallel working on a ordinance that would allow for its successful adaptive reuse.
Councilor Gerard, then Councilor Turiel.
Thank you, Mr. President. So Tom, so basically what you're saying, and this is what I understood, that the whole purpose of this ordinance development is that, like, I look at projects in Ward 6, like the Pickering School, and other schools that have been developed into residential that have been done very piecemeal here and there, and this is to have an opportunity to do a comprehensive plan for how we're going to consider to develop all these properties. Is that correct?
Mr. President, through you, Councilor Gerard, I think it's really looking at, to provide as we understand the regulations, as the regulations exist today, to provide a path that's clear. It still engages the public in that review with the planning board minimally for those hearings. I guess I do take exception to Mr. Carr's representation that, we're skirting the public, or suggestions that the public aren't involved. That's something that's very, personally and professionally, is very a value that we have in the department and in the city, that public are involved in our processes. I think through the development of this ordinance, we had 2 public meetings prior to starting this. We've had other conversations with individuals throughout the process, just in developing this, never mind the actual development that is coming through the process. So this is meant to provide a path that allows for these properties to legally be repurposed and still have the public participation occur.
Thank you.
Could I just correct one thing?
Yes, you may. Mr. Carr?
No.
Mr. Carr, I will entertain this. Just keep it extremely brief because there's a rebuttal to his comment. I'll allow this. Very brief.
It's not a use variance. A use variance would be illegal when it's a non-conforming use. The residential use is a permitted use. So I don't buy that argument.
So,
if you can direct all your comments to me.
Yes, Mr. President, I am not an attorney, so I'm relying upon the attorneys that we've used in this process. The existing use that we're talking about at 5 Broad Street is a municipal use, and municipal use is an exempt use. So therefore, you cannot have a change in non-conforming use because the use itself is not non-conforming, because it's an exempt use. Since it is an exempt use, we're now providing a path so that the property can be used for something other than a 2-family structure.
Councilor Turiel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, to Tom. So, I mean, I understand the rationale behind this and the scope of this. I realize that at this point we're talking about a total of 4 properties that are the 3 church properties and the 1 municipal properties this time. But I also, having sat in this seat for the last 7 years and been through a number of zoning processes, including some with some of the same people in this room, that if we tried to do it on a site-by-site basis, then we're opening it up to the dreaded spot zoning.
Exactly.
And so I realize that there's a need for a scope that covers this, and the only thing that I am curious about in regards to it is we have, and I like I said, I don't have a problem with it. We do have the parameter here that the change of use is proposed in the building is at least 3,000 square feet. There are a number of smaller buildings that are covered by that if we, the one thing, and I assume this would probably, because you're setting it to a class, if we really had concerns about it, we could probably set that minimum size larger to whatever the size of the smallest building that we're looking at in this process is, and erase some of the concerns that people have that I understand why they have them, but I don't see I see the actual truth behind it too. So that's my only real question in that regard. If we, that might be a tweak that we could do, but otherwise I get why we're doing this, because we have 4 properties. We don't have a permitting path otherwise, because they are things like exempt uses and the religious use as well, and we don't have that zoning option that we once had. So, you know, this does pretty clearly make sense to me overall in the rationale. We might be able to ease some concerns by tweaking that number in 8732 if need be, but outside of that, I don't see an issue there.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Don't go too far. I think that as we continue, we're going to get back to the public testimony. We might call you back up a couple more times. We're going to start at the back row here and continue going around. If you'd like to speak, back over here. Yes, go ahead. Name and address for the record, and please, everybody, address your concerns to myself.
Hi.
Keep the personalities out of it.
Fred Babesheimer, 17.5 River Street. I just have two quick comments, both kind of echoing, well, actually one's a comment. I still remain a little bit concerned about this proposal in the fact that I think nobody really completely understands what properties are covered, and I think that remains a concern to me. And it also seems that if part of the criteria for this is a certain age of the building, as time goes on, as this proposal stays on the books longer, more and more properties potentially are going to age into this ordinance over time, meaning even if we understand exactly which properties are on it now, 10 years from now, there's potentially going to be even more, and we don't understand the implications of that completely. So I'm concerned about that. And I also want to echo something that's been said already, that if this is in fact to promote historic preservation, not having the Historic Commission have an authoritative role in the process it's nonsensical to me. It's really important to me. It was good to hear Mickey Northcutt, the way he's approaching development, taking into consideration the historic aspects of these buildings and doing it right. But not all developers will do that, and without the teeth. And just to say that it's maybe too difficult to do or another step, I think it's a worthwhile step. The Planning Board and the Historic Commission bring different expertise to the process, and they should all be involved, and it should be kind of mandatory if the primary objective is historic preservation. Thank you.
Good points. Thank you. Okay, continuing. Right here.
Chuck Von Bruns, 3 River Street. My first comment is, why do we need this? And it was interesting, Mr. Northcutt's comments basically told me that he didn't need it because he could use some other vehicle that already exists to accomplish what he wants to accomplish, and he's willing to go with this proposal or with the existing proposal. So first of all, I'm a little confused why we need this at all. The existing zoning ordinance has a system of checks and balances that allows residents and neighborhoods most affected by development proposals to defend their way of life and property. It isn't perfect. I'm just reiterating John Carr's comments here, but it isn't perfect, but it allows for a process of give and take that always leads to better property development. And in my time in Salem, I've seen that happen a few times. It always seems to work when there's a back and forth. My second comment, I'm very skeptical of proposals that do not have great precision and specificity in their language and allow for significant interpretation in the future. Interpretation that is generally to the benefit of the developer. Developers always have the best lawyers to push their agenda, while the neighborhood and the neighborhoods and the public have limited expertise and funds to fight for their rights. It's like the Patriots playing the Salem High School football team. Anybody who's been around Salem knows that's the case. My last comment, who is pushing for this proposal? Since the main thrust of this proposal is the reuse of religious properties, my conclusion is that because the Catholic Church is shrinking and in need of funds, they're looking to maximize the value on these surplus properties now and in the future. Would this proposal have been conceived if St. James and St. Mary's were not ripe for development and if their maximum value were not stifled by existing zoning regulations? And my very last comment, if the Catholic Church and the current city administration are so interested in compassion and social justice, why haven't they applied these principles in a meaningful way to this amendment? I have heard next to nothing substantive other than what Mickey talked about, and that's not part of this proposal. Nothing in this amendment about housing for seniors, needy veterans, and affordable housing. I don't call 10% affordable housing clause substantive or meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Good evening. I'm Jane Arlander, 93 Federal Street. To begin, I would like to ask you all to think about a question. Does this ordinance really facilitate environmental sustainability and resilience? It is clear from Section 87.1, or the purpose of this proposed municipal and religious adaptive reuse overlay district ordinance, that one of the objectives is to facilitate environmental sustainability and resilience. That being said, I find no specific measures in this ordinance that diminish the environmental impact of increased population density and associated parking needs, increased traffic congestion, increased water, sewage, and electricity use, and the loss of green and pervious space secondary to new construction. This is of great concern to me because Salem is a coastal community, and it is traversed by several rivers. As we go forward, we must be progressive or make progressive changes in the zoning that reflect the environmental impact of the new zoning changes that we're making now, as well as the effects of climate change. And I don't feel that this ordinance does that. I would like to propose an amendment to the new zoning ordinance such that the new construction would not be allowed in a flood hazard overlay district or a FEMA designated flood zone that happens to coexist or actually be on top of an eligible adaptive reuse building and its property. I want to emphasize that when I refer to new construction, I'm referring only to the new construction that is separate from the eligible building being reused. In conclusion, I believe that the addition of this amendment will better advance the welfare of the general public and make the permitting process easier for redevelopment. Most importantly, it will add at least one specific measure for reducing the environmental impact created by the ordinance we have before us. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to continue on. Paul?
Polly Wilbert, 7 Cedar Street. I join with others in supporting the need for affordability through this ordinance. I don't think 10% makes a dent. We're facing a tidal wave of rising housing costs and rents. We all know seniors who have had to leave Salem. I know some with requiring emergency housing vouchers. I would ask that the ordinance be changed to require 20% affordability and a Salem residency requirement for people who would move into the affordable units under this ordinance. I urge the council to stop solving Boston's housing problem. I also ask you to address this ordinance as a fact-based perspective. This ordinance, through the ability to use our public parking facilities for private parking, puts a burden on our community. I don't think that we really know until we draw the 1,000-foot circle around each of our public parking amenities what could be included for that parking requirement. I think we could find that 211 Bridge Street also would be within 1,000 feet of the Church Street lot or the museum parking garage. I would suggest that in that fact-based address, you ask for a report on all of the permits that are presently bought for the garage and that are required to be bought for the garages and parking lots from the parking authority. I don't think we know the facts. And we're talking about what's happening today, but I think we need to understand the baseline of where we could end up in the future. Some of these are very dense developments. They're big buildings and they're big lots. They could end up at 500 square feet with a lot of units. I think one of the things that we don't fully appreciate is how wrong it is when we sell these permits and the holders of the permits don't get guaranteed parking spaces in October, on the weekends, or on the Halloween holiday. We're looking to use those amenities for our snow emergency parking. And as I said at the last meeting, we have 36,000 registered motor vehicles in Salem, 10,000 more than 10 years ago. The reality is that people commute long distances to high-paying jobs so they can afford to live here. We're not at a point where we have this desired lessening of the number of wheels on the streets and in the parking spaces in Salem. I think we have to look at some facts, and I think that it's incumbent upon the council as well as the planning board to not just say we'll fix it or we'll take care of it or we'll work it out. I think we need to understand what the facts are, and that includes how many passes are being purchased on an annual basis but are required by agreement or through permitting of developments already to park in garages and on Riley Plaza. During the discussion about moving the carnival to Riley Plaza, the concern for the people that held permits there was where were they going to get displaced to? And that's not inconsiderable when they're already required to pay for a permit. When we include our schools in the overlay, as I said at the last meeting, I think the council needs to know what will play out by including the schools. We already know we have received millions of dollars in MSBA grants for building and renovating our schools. We'll continue to want to use that state grant funding going forward, particularly for already anticipated capital improvements and renovations that the mayor referenced in your January 5th strategy retreat. When you use the MSBA monies, a 50-year encumbrance on selling a school is put in place, which includes paying back some or all of the grant if a school does not operate for the entire 50-year time period. And there's a further 10-year penalty period when seeking further school grants after having sold a school could preclude receiving further grant monies during the 10-year look back. The high school will be 50 years old in 8 years. Witchcraft Heights will be 50 years old in 4 years, when they would then be included in the overlay, as it now stands. Further, does the council adequately understand today the circumstances, including demographic changes in population and trends in education, that could motivate our community to want to build a new school and close an old school, and how we would be setting the table for such a transition through this overlay? The city would need to thread the MSBA needle. Please make sure you understand the implications of this as you consider this ordinance. I believe that transparency is important and that the list should be the list. The council should vote to make the list of overlay properties part and parcel of the ordinance. Let's not have the overlay apply to an unknown evolving number of buildings. Be transparent. When you have created the entrance corridor overlays, when you've added an entrance corridor, you've amended your ordinance. I think the same process should apply here. If you're going to cover a building, amend the ordinance. The fact that Old Town Hall and City Hall are on this list as examples is really problematical. We're an historic city. We should never diminish these icons of Salem's history by having them set as potential renovation for condos or apartments. I don't think we want to diminish our history by ending up with a commemorative plaque on the wall of City Hall or Old Town Hall because some future council said, well, the council in 2019 must have thought it would be okay, otherwise they wouldn't have written the ordinance the way they did it. So in 20 years, don't look back and have somebody point the blame at you for the loss of some really historic, important fabric that we all respect. On page 3, I would ask that you amend number 11, which permits galleries, to also include museums. We're an historic city. Additional venues, even small ones, that host and display elements of Salem history would be an asset, especially in our tourist-centric economy. I'm also concerned about the number of stories that are allowed in the flood zone. I think that when we get into a position where the dimensions then fight with verbiage that says how many stories you can have, and it's left to somebody in the future to sort it out, we're not doing the work that we should have done to make it clear today. Finally, I want to ask you to leave the public hearing open. There's nothing in Section 5 of the Mass General Law for Chapter 40A that says you have to close this public hearing. The planning board can go and work on their recommendation, and then it can be brought back to the city council in a continuing joint hearing to have final comment on what's presented from the planning board. Treat Salem citizen comment with respect and not as though it's an unfortunate annoyance to be endured. This is a complex piece of zoning, and as counselors, you must understand factually what it allows, and we must get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. It is with regard to the last comment that I'd like to comment on. I had several meetings, conversations with our city clerk and our city solicitor because I wanted to get the public input along the way. Unlike the last public hearing that we had, where there were some difficulties and people were complaining. And I had discussed with the councilors at our last public meeting that I was going to introduce or recommend a motion that we divide the public hearing, and the planning board would continue their public hearing on their own and decide and make a recommendation back. And then the city council could then receive additional public comment because the public hearing would be still open. We would close it and then may deliberate and make a decision. But the comments of Polly just now kind of make sense. But back in my questions to the solicitor in dividing came back in a negative way. She thought that we could not, in her opinion, we could not divide this public hearing to keep the public comment open along the way, was her official opinion. So I won't be motioning for that, requesting a motion for that here tonight. But with that, we've just heard from several speakers, and they were excellent. I'd like to invite our planner back up just to respond to some of the highlights of each of these, and then we can move right along. We only have a few more speakers left.
Could I ask that we allow the public to continue, and then we can have the planner come back up?
Okay, we're happy to do that.
Come back up
Good
as
idea.
well,
That's a good idea.
And respond to everything that we've heard comprehensively.
Okay. We're going to start here? Yep. And again, we're continuing right around.
Darlene Mellis, 115 Federal Street. I'd just like to second the idea that the Historic Commission has an opportunity to actually have a recommendation that needs to be incorporated. I'm very concerned that they have a chance. There's been times when I felt, geez, I really wanted somebody to have a slightly more classical take on design, speaking up more strongly. Secondly, I am concerned, as Polly has mentioned, about the MSBA money being mentioned in this. The institutional knowledge will pass with us. We won't really be thinking about, oh, well, that school was rebuilt and added on to in such and such a date in the 1990s, again in the 2000s, and again in the 2014s. This onus on us to not trigger a review by the MSBA is going to be there, so I'd be much more comfortable if there was some mention about this cautionary procedure included in your ordinance so that people later on go, oh, what is that? Just as an institutional memory. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Carol Carr. I live at 7 River Street, and I feel very much like Mr. Von Bruns and my husband earlier spoke. And also the Historic Commission, instead of being just a recommendation, would be a requirement. We're talking about historic buildings after all. And just a couple of questions that I would put to the councilors. One is, before making a decision on this, I would ask you to ask yourself, is the proposed ordinance better than the process we now have, and why is it better? Not that it's easier, but why is it better? Okay, that's the first question. Second question would be, well, actually, I would ask you to make a list. So over here, you'd have one list, and on that list, you would say, what are the advantages to the neighbors that are in this area where this ordinance would have an effect? And then the second list, what are the advantages to the developer whose property would fall under this ordinance? And so after you compare the two lists, who is the greater beneficiary of this ordinance? Is it your constituents who voted you into the office and to whom you represent? Or is it the developers whose goal it is to make money? And then the last question, do you know enough about the details of this proposed ordinance to feel absolutely, positively confident that it is better than the process we now have? Thank you.
We're going to continue down. Why don't we do the back row all the way across and then come back in reverse, loop around, and do the table second. So let's do the back row. Back row, please. Thank you.
Hi, Tim Jenkins, 18 Broad Street, but I'm speaking for Historic Salem tonight. And I'd like to begin just letting the audience know that we've really enjoyed and appreciate working with Amanda and Tom. We've gone back and forth many times, and including right up to today. And we think a lot of progress has been made on the ordinance as versus its original proposal. But I'd like to read a couple paragraphs, and I'm not going to repeat a lot of what's been said, but I do agree with it. I'd like to focus on a couple key points that we've been discussing from the outset. As we discussed, we're in support of the reuse of historic buildings, which is a key aim of our organizational mission since the city and a number of city residents got together and saved the Witch House 75 years ago, and this is our 75th anniversary, so this is our mission, and it's what we spend our time thinking about. We also especially welcome the changes and appreciate the changes made to the new construction provisions of the ordinance, which is where we have our largest concerns. We appreciate that they will comply with the standards of the underlying zoning. Many of these buildings are in residential districts. They serve the residential neighborhoods, and the scale of the neighborhood buildings versus the actual structures is quite different, and there's a reason for it. So if you're going to add new construction, we really do believe that it's probably inappropriate in most instances to build buildings of similar scale. That's not true of all these properties. They're not all located in local neighborhoods, so the underlying zoning would prevail. And we think that's a good strategy, simplifies the process. And we believe this is much closer to the National Trust model, which was actually used, I believe, as the foundation of this ordinance, and it's been very successful in bringing back a lot of underused properties of this type all over the country. So, and that was also co-developed with the Urban Land Institute. We do think that there should be at least some standard of minimum lot area per dwelling unit for existing buildings. There is none in here at this time, okay? Which means that these buildings can have an unlimited, it's impractical to think of this, but an unlimited number of units put into them. That may not be appropriate. may not be appropriate for the neighborhood. Right now, there's nothing, so we'd like you to at least consider that, and the planning board as well. And even more so, additionally, we prefer that a minimum lot area requirement in the case of new construction definitely be added. Right now, it is there. Right now, it's 500 square feet. We'd prefer that it be the underlying zoning, but we have discussed it, and we think another alternative might be using 3,500 square feet, which is the standard that's used in R3 and the NRCC now, and it seems to, it could well apply in most instances and work here. And really what it means is that you limit the size of new construction that can be built potentially in a parking lot, which seems to be a big concern going around right now, and the impacts on parking and whatnot. So this just doesn't easily incentivize that to occur. Let's see here. The only other point I wanted to raise was we agree that it would be very appropriate to have a recommendation, an actual proper review, evaluation, and recommendation made to the planning board by the Salem Historic Commission. In every instance here, we are talking about historic structures. Many of them are already going to be reviewed. For instance, 5 Broad Street, the old senior center, that's in a local historic district. It will have to be reviewed anyway by the Salem Historic Commission. But also a point that Amanda made, that it seems a bit redundant to have the Design Review Board and the Historic Commission go through a similar process of reviewing. Remember, the Historic Commission only has jurisdiction essentially over the exterior of buildings, not the interior. And in some instances, we as an organization would love to do as much as we can to save the interior, but we don't really have any say in that. So we just like to share those thoughts. There are plenty of others. People have made great comments. And I again want to thank also the public, because this process is really helpful to everybody. I think we'll get a better ordinance when we complete it. Thank you.
Mr. Jenkins, I want to thank you and Historic Salem for your input back and forth to the planning department. I've enjoyed reading the memos back and forth. So I think you've assisted in making a better vehicle, if you would. We're going to continue around the back row, please. Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. You two swapped seats on me. You can't be doing that.
Barbara Cleary, 104 Federal Street. I was part of the group working with Historic Salem, and Amanda and Tom, and I want to echo Tim's comments. It was a very productive process. They were very gracious and responsive, so it was good. I'm not going to repeat everything that Tim just said, or a lot of people have said. I just want to particularly focus on the density, which I think is particularly, with all the fixes that have been made, all of which I think have been positive. The density, I didn't realize that there was no density requirement in B5. I don't think that's an appropriate standard. These are mostly in residential districts. There should be some density requirement in the existing buildings. And I think that I can understand why you might not pick up the R1 or R2 densities for any new construction, but I don't think 500 square feet minimum lot area per dwelling unit that's a B5 standard. So I would echo the NRCC standard and the R3 standard, because those are for multifamily buildings or buildings that are in or adjacent to residential neighborhoods, so it seems an appropriate standard. I'd like to just talk finally about keeping the public hearing open. I understand that if you've got an opinion, you have to close it. I think with an ordinance of this complexity and so many pieces, that not to be able to have any dialogue between the city council and the planning board, between the public and the planning board as they take this up, is really detrimental. And I'd like you to consider that can you suspend the rules, for example, and allow public testimony at the planning board? Are you required to not take any written comment? So this really should be cleared up. It's been a problem for a while now. And then I would ask the city council, you can always suspend the rules as far as I know. So you might be able to do that when it comes back to you. Because if the planning board makes changes, and they might very well, I guess I would also say Her reader's comments I completely agreed with, except for the density. It would be good, just be good to have that dialogue. And one final thing, since this may be the only time we get to say anything, Polly, I would say nonprofit museums. Just saying. Thank you.
Okay. Tyler.
Tyler Terry, 22 School Street. First, it's important for the city council to not just consider the best case scenario, like with the CDC, but also try to think of what the worst case scenario is. Not that I have one to talk about, but it's important to make an informed decision and know and be honest about worst case scenarios with the ordinance. On the complexity of the ordinance, I'd really like to hear why the affordability section wasn't just kind of done beforehand separately as a general special permit requirement in the city of Salem. It's self-contained and probably should apply in general. And it cuts down on the number of words and makes things easier to reason about. On the Historic Commission review, I'd like to see three things. I'd like to require that the Historic Commission make they come to a finding that there is actually something significant that's worth preserving. If there's nothing worth preserving, then there's really no need to give all these waivers of the zoning to the development. And also a finding that the proposed development does actually preserve the thing that's historically interesting, because if it's not actually preserved, then there's no point in waiving all the stuff. And then continued oversight by the Historic Commission, because it should still be preserved afterwards. And then, yeah, I guess that's all. Thanks.
Justin Whittier, 10 River Street. First of all, congratulations, Mr. Chair, on your elevation. Thank you. So the revisions that we've seen to the dimensional table, I think are welcomed by everyone. It's more in line with the National Trust model, and I think that's all to the good. Still some concerns about density. One issue that I would have is just maybe a matter of making it explicit that new construction applies to additions as well as freestanding. That seems like it would be common sense, but just have to worry about the language in there if it's not explicit. I really think we should have approvals from the Historic Commission and the DRB. We've been told that this is really only about 3 or 4 properties, so these are unique situations. This is no hardship for Salem to have to go through those 2 more layers of approvals, and especially given the fact that this is supposed to be about preserving historic buildings. The idea that we can't suffer through approvals from those boards, I think is a bit silly, and no reason really not to have it. The only argument against I can see is that it's inconvenient for developers. And then I just want to offer one question. I understand why the list of properties might have been chosen, that you're looking to avoid issues of spot zoning. So you're looking to have a class of buildings or a category of things. So what it says here in the ordinance is we have eligibility. So I just wonder, is it not possible then to say we have a set of criteria for eligible properties which could be included, but to include any particular property, it would require a vote of the city council to actually include it. I don't know if that's workable or not, but I think everyone agrees, and the mayor has said that we really don't want to be redeveloping old town hall or the library or the schools or anything. So if that is a way to avoid putting them in the target, or at least add an additional safeguard, I think that would be to the good. Thank you.
If you'd like to speak.
Hi, Josiah Fisk, 358 Essex Street. My office address is 10 Derby Square. I want to start by seconding a couple of things that Councilor Turiel said. I think that the 3,000 square foot limit, that's smaller than many houses. That struck me as very odd. We shouldn't need an exception for something so small. I support the idea of raising that limit to a more appropriate limit. I don't know what that limit is because I'm not a professional in this regard. I also think that the issue with parking, I mean, especially when there is, as I understand it, some discussion at some time in the future having a large plan for developing the middle of Salem, including possible redevelopment that involves Museum Place and the Almies parking lot, the courthouses, and the city-owned property adjacent to the T garage. We're talking in many cases, I think, about a net loss of parking or in a net increase in residential structures in this area. And so I think to be relying on this parking at the same time that it is being contemplated that parking be diminished, certainly as a percentage of relative to the residential density around there, I think may be unwise. Haven't really heard any discussion of that point. And also want to second Mr. Reeder's comments. I think was really great that he had given this a close reading, and the things that he found there I think are obviously quite important. I think that I think we all should read things that carefully. I think it's important to have many people do that and find the things. This is just one person, and he found, 7 or 8 things. They're all in there in documents. It's the nature of documents when they are being drafted and refined. I think, with respect, Mr. Daniel, to what you said, I think there is a reason that's been provided, a rationale for why we need this, and that is because there cannot be a variance for a change of use. I understand that. Perhaps there are debates about whether even that is necessary, but let's say that that's true. I have yet to hear any discussion about a rationale for any other part of this proposal. That's just one part. There are many other parts to this, and we're having a lot of discussion about all the moving parts and all the unintended consequences. If we want something that is here to change, to allow us to fix this one issue, let's have that. And not all of these other complications that clearly are going to have ramifications and that we still clearly have not completely hashed out. There are issues that have come up tonight in this second evening of this hearing that haven't been aired before. There were things that were said at the end of the last hearing. For instance, I think Mayor Driscoll, you said that the list was only a matter of examples, which I think I was under the impression that was the actual list, or that the list was what governed. The list is not what governs, we now know. But now knowing that, I have to say, in that case, I feel as a citizen that I'm being told that we're approaching vote perhaps, or some deliberation on this. It's getting close. Let's get this thing through.
Mr. Fisk, if you can address your concerns to the President, please.
I apologize. We're being told that this is essentially ready to be voted on, and as a citizen, I'm sitting here saying my city can't even tell me which properties are affected. We don't even have a list. And then again, Councilor Turiel, I think the last hearing pointed out that the properties that are part of St. Joseph's weren't on the list. This simply does not seem ready for prime time to me, and it is important that it be so. The test of this is not how many evenings we spend here where we all have things that we could be doing other than this. The test is this thing right? Is it ready to go? Does it do what we want it to do and not do what we don't want it to do? And I don't believe that we are anywhere near that. And I'm sorry to have to say it. I appreciate the fact that this body has left the hearing open. I'm sorry to have to say that I think that it should continue to leave it open because not because I want to be here, not because any of us want to be here and to be through this process any more than we already have. But this is not ready, and I urge this body to leave this hearing open and to try to continue to have the patience and the perseverance to get this right, because once it's done, no one's going to remember how much time we spent on it, whether it was 2 evenings or 3 or 5 or 100. What people are going to remember is what resulted from this, and that's what we're all going to have to live with. Thank you.
Thank you. Continue around the back row, please. No? Okay, we're going to loop around here. Jeff?
Jeff Cohen, 12 Hancock Street, and I'm standing in support of this ordinance. Although I am the vice chairperson of Salem Sustainability, Energy, and Resiliency Committee, I'm not speaking representing the committee. However, I do appreciate Dr. Harlander's focus on climate change and the need for resiliency. One of the focuses, or one of the things that we've been spending most of our time on as a committee, and I hope more people will attend our meetings, is to be included in processes such as these. And it would be something we would welcome to make a review or a recommendation, not anything in binding, of course, on developments such as this. Number 2, the 878 affordability component. I believe that 10% is too low, although it was refreshing to hear what Mickey said about the intent of the CDC. That's just 2 properties, and there's no guarantee that's going to be developed by them. So I do believe 10% is too low, and I do believe that 80% of the median income is far too high. It is not in relative to serious inclusionary zoning, and I recommend something more in the line of 50%, does not exceed 50% of the area median income. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to continue with the table around. Go right ahead, sir.
Fawaz Abu Shark, 4 Harrison Road. I'm going to speak in general. So I think we can leave the hearings open, just we have it as a second hearing and a third hearing. They can go, look at what they want to do the recommendation, and bring it in a co-joint, and keep doing this till at least we come to some kind of form where it doesn't need much to change. And that may be the easiest way to keep the hearing open. Something that was said earlier by the mayor that kind of struck me, that she said, we don't know what's going on there, and that's why somehow we need flexibility. In my opinion, we actually need the opposite. We don't know what properties are going to be included. We don't know what properties are going to be added with the years. We don't know what we're going to be talking about in the future. So instead of then trying to find out how we can add parking and modify things, I think we need to have an ordinance now that covers the bases. This way, in the future, if something arose, they can go through a variance, through the ZBA, seek an easement, do anything. It should be on the developer to try to find a way to make things, not for us, the citizen, that he already has a permit, he already has the way out, and now we have to go take him to court or to go in the harder way. It should be the other way. We should protect the citizens now, where the developer should be doing it in the future. And the reason why I say that, because I was in a hearing about, I'm not going to speak the development and stuff because that wouldn't be proper at this point. They already got their permit. A certain developer got an easement on the size of the apartments that they wanted to build. Then they decided they were going to build some more property. So they went to the ZBA and they told them, we're only going 70 feet under. This 70 feet is under the number you got with the easement, not under. So they considered what they got becomes the bargaining point. And all of a sudden, it's like, it's a different discussion. I'm not saying this is happening now. Again, if I know we're talking a certain property, it's easier. But we're talking in general, we don't know what it's covered. We need to cover all the bases where in the future it will be easier for the citizens of Salem to preserve their way of life. And if the developer is trying to do something right, and I don't think anybody will stand in their way. Like you said, we all want to see those buildings developed and done. I'm glad that the CDC is taking part of this because they had many projects and they did a great job in many ways. And I don't think anybody can take any credit away from them. But then again, she said that she didn't know about the building, then we find out that the CDC is doing something. So to me, if we didn't know what we're doing and we need those things, so the CDC, you could discuss it with them. Anyways, this is not the discussion. My point is we need to make it easier for the citizen to protect themselves and give the developer always have ways to do what they want through the ZBA and the other. And the major thing to me here is we are taking the power of all authorities except of one side. If they say, okay, everything is gone. The historic doesn't have, it's like they don't need anything. I think we still need the historic division to have their word. I think the city council, any entity that can help the people protect themselves, especially the elected entities, not the appointed one or the hired one, we need to keep a lot of power in their hand to protect the citizens that they swore to protect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. That concludes the, I'm sorry, we have a third row. Snuck in here. Sorry.
Ann Whittier, 10 River Street. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to speak about the process also. First of all, I'd like to begin by wishing you all a belated but very happy New Year and say thank you so much for allowing me to speak tonight by keeping the hearing open last time we met. And thank you so much for letting all of my neighbors and friends speak too. Some voted to close the hearing last time we met, declaring they'd heard enough from constituents. Yet issues were raised at that last meeting that were important enough to cause the process to be reconsidered. And some very important revisions were made as a result of that, revisions for the better. Now there's a push on now to build more and faster, with inferences that the public process gets in the way of that. It's been said we need to expedite this process because time is not our friend in this matter, that by taking time to consider possible unintended consequences, we risk decreasing confidence from the development community. Well, I think that's baloney. This city will never lack interest of developers and realtors, I don't believe. Some people grumbled that the meeting took a long time last time and said there is a need to minimize the number of meetings and the length of time for the public to attend and offer comments. Well, some councilors or board members may feel this way, but I do not think the public feels that way. And it's the public who's going to have to live with the consequences of the decisions. After all, you're here now to make decisions, but you might not stick around. You might be gone in 5, 10, 2 years. And when you're a distant memory, it would be nice to know that the decisions that were made won't have hurt the things we love about this city. Even tonight, there are still issues to be addressed. My concern, too, is with the list. Whether the library, Old Town Hall, or City Hall were placed on the list as serious targets for development is not clear to me. But this ordinance has created a pathway for that development. Why? I can't believe any of us would want to see Old Town Hall become condos, so why are we even making it possible? So thank you, councilors, and everyone who does their job with respect and patience. You give us some confidence that the process will continue to limp along.
Thank you.
Lou Sirianni, Botts Court, Salem. There's very little that I have to add tonight. The councilors have heard, I think, thoughtful knowledge from knowledgeable people about some of the detriments in this ordinance. I would suggest that you take strong consideration to have the planning board start to review this, bring it back here, have more input from the members of the public. Once that's done, I think you should try to find a vehicle. Just leave this session open or not or whatever, but let's get the planning board to work, bring something back that's kind of the final thing, let the public review that and have comments on it. Seems pretty straightforward to me, and I hope you'll be able to do that. There are two details that I'd like to also suggest that you take very serious consideration. The density, which Barbara spoke to, it's way too low. It needs to, that 500 number, it just doesn't seem at all reasonable or practical. Like, please take a good, strong look at that, planning board as well. And then finally, I think right now, as I read the zoning ordinance, if there's a building that is within the purview of the Historic Commission, they would only have a recommendation role in that building. So read that carefully. I don't think that's the intent. And I think it's very important that the Historic Commission be able to review these historic buildings. I mean, it's the whole point of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica Herbert, 70 Webb Street. I want to also thank the planning department, Amanda and Tom and Patty and everyone that worked on this. A lot of work went into it, and they've been very responsive, not only in developing it, but also perfecting it. And so I think we're very lucky to have them. I'm going to basically echo what I said at the December 13th meeting, and that is the importance of the Historic Commission having jurisdiction, inclusive jurisdiction, I should say, over the new construction in particular. We obviously have jurisdiction over the historic buildings, but the new construction is really important because you want that to fit within the neighborhood. You want the design and materials to be sympathetic to what's happening in each particular neighborhood where this new construction might take place. 3 years ago, we were very fortunate to have a professional preservation planner join us who has been an incredible asset to the Historic Commission. So I'm going to say that it wouldn't really be a burden for the Historic Commission to work on these projects, at least not for me. From that standpoint, I think we could certainly put the time in that would be required. The question of why should the Historic Commission be involved in the new construction? 2 words: unforeseen conditions. And I think my city councilor, Mr. McCarthy, can speak to that. And so if the Historic Commission made recommendations on certain aspects of new construction, and then all of a sudden unforeseen conditions, but our decision, our input had been closed, that could be a problem. So I think it's important that the Historic Commission be involved through the process. And we also work really well with the members of the other commissions, planning and design review and so forth. So I think it could work very well. I don't see any problems with it, and it is obviously historic buildings. But again, the new construction really needs to fit within these neighborhoods, and they need to complement the historic buildings as well. So we have 601 properties in 5 historic districts, so a few more, it's not a big deal. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we got everybody. That was, you've already spoken? You have something to add? Oh. Did you arrive late?
I wasn't going to talk, but I just have a little to say. But
Okay. Come on up, please. I allowed the, for just clarification, I allowed the rebuttal earlier because it was in direct comment to another person, not in your presentation. Okay. Go ahead, sorry, name and address.
My name is Becky Putnam, and I live in Broad Street, and I'm here, I'm not an activist, I'm not a preservationist, I'm just a Salemite, and I love it, and I've loved listening to what everyone has said. And today I was reading an article that actually Donna Seeger wrote, and I was just going through recycling, and there was an article about an urban village, and that Salem is an urban village. And I've listened to so many people talk about the density that this overlay might present. And I just think if we all sort of take a little more time and not vote immediately, but really think that what we're trying to do is create an urban village. Salem's a city, but it's always had town-like characteristics. And I think what we want to do more than anything is preserve the character of the city it has had for a long time. I had parents that grew up here in Salem and loved it, and both my parents always thought of Salem as a town and not a city. And I think it's really great that we all have a voice and we're all here so we can talk. And I just think we might need some more time so we all together can come to a place where we're all happy, and it's it takes a village to make a city or a town. And if you can think of how we're an urban village and how all this development can really add to the city and its history and its preservation, but still have a feeling of community and not be too dense. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite our planner back up.
Could I just, I know they want to finish, so I think, would I be able to speak before?
Council Sergeant.
Yeah, hold on. Well, Mr. President, to me, if Mickey Northcutt was doing all of this and all the zoning was for Mickey Northcutt, I don't think I'd have a care in the world for what they do. But unfortunately, zoning goes with the land, not with the developer. And, there's a lot of unintended consequences when you try to do that. And once the zoning's changed, it's changed for a long time. We can't just go back and see something went wrong and we're going to change it again. We'd run into lawsuits by developers and who bought land based on that zoning. So I think research will show that schools like the Pickering School and the Bowditch School weren't all done with the use variance, like a change of zoning. I think they were done by one non-conforming use to another, and variances from height, setback, parking, similar to what we do a lot today. Without a zoning change, we, rather than give more by right, we allow a little less by right, but we allow a lot more by negotiation, by citizen input, by neighborhood input, and I think that leverage makes a better project, Mr. President. Variants are given with citizen input, less worry about appeals. The 20-day appeal process goes by fairly smooth, rather than a 1 or 2 year long court appeal. So if we say we need this rezoning to do things by right, we say we can't redevelop properties by going from one non-conforming use to another, that we can't use the not substantially less detrimental, that we can't give variances from height, density, front, back, etc., like we do so often today. But what I see is that if this zoning goes forward, 5, 10 years from now, we'll be here with a project that's going forward with this zoning in place. And they'll want more. And they'll come in and they'll want a change in use, because some of this is business, from one non-conforming use to another, that it won't be less detrimental, that they'll want a variance from height, parking, etc. Everything that they say we can't do today to allow a project to happen, they'll be here to ask to get more than what zoning allows them. So, I know we want to have a nice little village here, but if we don't be careful how we develop, sooner or later we're going to have a village as big as Boston. So I say we got to be careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other comments from councilors, planning board members? Councilor Gerard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, if I can just ask a question. Something actually was Jane Arlander's comment about environmental considerations, that under 8.7.5, in the second part there where it says board may grant special permit upon finding that the public good will be served and that one, the residential use would not be adversely affected or not adversely affect the underlying non-residential district, and two, non-residential uses permitted in the underlying non-residential district are not noxious to the multifamily use. And that to me, it's incongruous with having laundromats and dry cleaning establishments. As people were speaking, as I was listening to different comments, that I also kind of poked around a little bit on some different websites regarding environmental health. And I mean, if you're regularly exposed to the chemicals in laundromats, and constant exposure, then you are increasing your risk for potentially developing some cancers. But of course, you have to be exposed on a regular basis. So I'm just wondering, do we need the laundromats, dry cleaning establishments, or can we take that out? And I don't know if Amanda can answer that, or Tom, or like why that specifically?
We modeled those uses after the NRCC uses. It's looking at that village concept of laundromats and neighborhood serving, and that's why that type of use was included in the NRCC, and we brought it over here. But, you know, again, this is discussion with council and the planning board recommendation. If you don't feel it's appropriate, you can certainly take it out. That was just the reason and why we added it.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing, in terms of all the discussion about the process, and you're good. Okay, thank you. That there have been a number of comments about the process, that people aren't going to have an opportunity to speak, and there are numerous opportunities to speak on these things. That whenever we have a joint public hearing, the first step, we bring it to the public hearing. Then when we close it, it goes to the planning board. There's no more public discussion at that time. The planning board comes back to us. It comes back on our agenda. People get an opportunity to speak to it, and when it comes out on the agenda. People also get more opportunities that if we feel that there were some questions about how the planning board made their decision, that then we want to have committee meetings on this, then we have more committee meetings. So there is plenty of public output, there's plenty of opportunity for more public input. It doesn't end right here. So I don't understand the fear about closing the public hearing at saying that there's not going to be any further public input, because there absolutely will be. I mean, we represent the people, and there's plenty of opportunity. They can write to us, they can write to the planning board, so just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
If we close, just to clarify, if we close the public hearing, any letters or comments submitted to the planning board or to the city council will not be forwarded to us because the public hearing is closed. But if they were to contact us individually, that would be different. We could receive those comments.
No, we could receive them, we would receive them either sending us emails to citycouncilors@salem.com or sending to our individual emails, and then when it comes back to us and on our regular council agenda, we can then address them then. We can then have committee hearings and we address them then. There's plenty more opportunities for us to have a continuing dialogue. Just want to clarify that.
Okay. Councilor Milo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think maybe I heard something different, but just from what I'm hearing regarding the process, it sounds to me like the process is working in terms of having this back and forth discussion, making the ordinance better every time we have a discussion, go back, you know, amend it, come back. It's this iterative kind of thing that happens. And if I heard what some people said, I think they were saying, let's get this ordinance to the point where, you know, the planning board can dot the i's and cross the t's and whatever, and hopefully when it does come back to us, then we've got a fairly finished product. But that's just what I heard, and maybe other people heard differently. I don't know.
Thank you. Councilor Torrio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll kind of like build on what my two colleagues prior just discussed. There's the joint public hearing process, which is the process we use, in Salem. And in that joint public hearing process, both bodies, the planning board and the city council, have a chance to sit here and listen to feedback from the public and take that into consideration. And in our first session, leaving the hearing open did give the planning department an opportunity to take some of those initial concerns into account, bring them forward, make some edits to what is before us, and we're working with that now. And that's worked out well. That's how we handle all our zoning process. But as has been said, excuse me, I'm still getting over the cold. Before the planning board can actually work on this and get it back, and then be able to get us back something to work with, we do have to ultimately close the joint public hearing. They can't consider it and they can't deliberate on it themselves until we've done that by our process. Once that they have done that step, and they've had extensive public input in the process getting to that point, once they've taken that into account and worked on the ordinance further, when they submit it back to the city council, we do have a time frame in which we have to act upon it, but we don't have to pass it on the floor the night it comes back to us. We can put it into a committee, we can put it to the body, we can have public discussion, we can make further edits within parameters ourselves based on that feedback that we get. And yes, the public comment to the ordinance as such, as part of the hearing process, that ends when we close it. But the public input doesn't stop until such point as we've gone for second passage, because there is ample opportunity for the public to weigh in with us as a body, with us individually, and if we see fit, in the committee process as well.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. It seems here, after listening to everyone the last couple meetings, I'm glad this came back with some improvements, but I think there has to still be some changes. These buildings, they've been empty for a few years now. We're here to represent the voters. I feel if this needs to stay open for as long as it takes, I think that's our job. I don't think we should rush this through, and I think we should listen to the people. I think we should keep this open and see if this can be tweaked a little more till everyone's more happy with it and satisfied with the product. Because it is really going to have an effect on the city long past all of us are here. So, thank you.
Good points. Okay. We're keeping our comments, unfortunately, to the city council and the planning board. Matt Vino, please.
Just a brief comment. So I've always viewed the public hearing process as an opportunity to listen and to gather information, and not necessarily as the venue for the more collaborative give and take of amending, tweaking, questioning, discussing, working on as part of a kind of a working group. That I really would recommend to the city council would be, to Councilor Gerard's comment, the appropriate venue would be the committee of the city council. And unless someone told me otherwise, I would imagine that as part of that subcommittee process, you could engage anybody that you wanted to be part of that process, whether it be members of the public, members of the planning board, acting in their capacities as individuals, to participate in that venue. That feels to me like the right place to do it. As I recall from sitting in the seats that you're sitting in, that the time frame is constraining. Once the recommendation comes back from the planning board, the clock really starts to tick. And that is not, those aren't rules of the city of Salem, but are prescribed in state statutes, so they're not something that anybody in this room could really make a decision to change. So I think that would be my recommendation, unless there was a desire to gather more information and gather more input. I would recommend the public hearing be closed, sent off to the planning board where we can have our deliberations in public, and then back to the city council, and if there's a desire to continue to work on it, send it back to committee, and we can continue to work on it. Thank you.
Just want to point out, Councilman McCarthy, 1 second, that we have, from the date that we closed the public hearing, we have 90 days to act, and that's to a city council meeting, and typically it doesn't fall in the correct way. So it sounds, 90 days sounds like a lot, but that's including the planning board's deliberations, and by the time you get your recommendation back to us, that's included in that window of time. Councilman McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Anticipating this debate, I asked the city solicitor to prepare me Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, which I will submit to you. Actually, I'll submit to you with the timeline on it, which, as former Council Vino stated, the timeline's on here. It says, public hearing held in the quorum of the city council and the planning board required. Hence, last meeting, we had to wait until we had a quorum of the planning board. 21 days after the hearing, the planning board to report back to the city council. That's the time frame that you alluded to. If no planning board action is taken within the 20 days, the council may act without any recommendation from the planning board. Council has 90 days from the hearing date to vote. That's the time frame.
Right.
As by Mass General Law. So there's nothing that precludes this body from, after, what the issue is with the way this is laid out in Mass General Law is, we can't get back their formal recommendations back to us until we move it over to them. So we need to move it to them before we can even deliberate. And then the interesting part is if anyone's concerned about our action, the council has 90 days. If no action is taken within 90 days, by the council must hold another public hearing. Very similar to this, but there's nothing that precludes in this that you could not have assuming that the matter would be, if at the point when it gets referred back to the city council, if there's a lot of substantive changes, then if the city council so choose, it would then refer to the Committee on License or Legal Affairs co-posted, then we would have a meeting, and then at that point, anyone at the, we could open it up at that point. But this is the cheat sheet, spreadsheet, whichever way you want to call it, that has been, I think the first time I saw it was when I sat here next to Councilor Vino, who was sitting there, and that was like 10 years ago. But this is the cheat sheet that, but it's written in Mass General Law, and I understand that you could interpret it that it says after the hearing. Does it mean you have to close the hearing? The way it's always been done, as historically over the last 10 years, as we close the public hearing, because that formally ends it, then they can go deliberate and then send back their recommendations. And then what we do at that point, that's our choice. And that's the open-ended part of this. So, I respect the public's input, and we really do. And anyone can reach out and email me whenever they want. There's nothing that precludes they can't relative to that. And depending upon what the will is when it comes back, that's the timeline that's set by Mass General Law.
Thank you. Councilman Mello.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just looking at the calendar. So say we send it off today, I'm assuming the planning board will meet next week on it, right? Your next meeting? Yeah, the 17th. Then we've got a meeting on the 24th. So basically we'd have like close to 2 months.
If I may.
Right? Am I looking at it right?
You're correct. The sheet that I gave up when I asked the city solicitor to prepare it, she put the both timelines on there if we continue the public hearing tonight or if we closed it tonight. Okay. And it's on that sheet. It spells it out. They'd have to refer it back by the end of the month, and then we'd have the time from there. But it's on the sheet that I forwarded to the council president. About 2 months.
Yeah, okay. Or started over.
Or started over.
Right.
You can pass this down to Councilman Mello. I have my own copy of it. Any other questions from the councilors? Questions or concerns from the planning board? There being none, I'd like to invite our planner back up to address some of the concerns that were raised.
Mr. President, excuse me, were there specific things you wanted that you're asking, or do you want me to just...
Yes, Councilor Gerard mentioned the environmental and sustainability resiliency, as Jane Islander did as well.
Amanda answered that.
I'm sorry?
Amanda answered that.
I apologize, but Jane Islander raised environmental and sustainability resiliency. If you can address that, sir.
Sure. I think, Mr. President, the idea here, in part of the public purpose of being looking at a sustainable approach to development, the biggest piece of that is that buildings are being reused, and rather than demolishing and rebuilding or building something new, that one of the intrinsic values of adaptive reuse is that it's also one of the most sustainable approaches to doing development. So I think that that's part and parcel with that aspect of it. Comment from Jane Arlander was looking at, part of her comment was about not permitting development within the flood plain, that would require flood hazard within the flood hazard overlay district. I think that the flood hazard overlay district exists and has findings that need to be obtained by the planning board in order to receive that special permit. So I look at this being consistent with the ordinance that we have today and the process that we have.
We heard testimony from quite a few people on the 10% simply was not enough, at 20% recommendation for affordability with a Salem resident requirement.
Yes, thank you. I was very happy to hear people advocating for affordable housing, because that is something critical in our community, and a lot of work that we are undertaking right now. Amanda is actually sort of leading our housing policy analysis and development, and there's we are currently working with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council on developing an inclusionary zoning ordinance that will speak specifically for what level of affordability makes sense in Salem. The reason that the draft ordinance before you has the 10% requirement at 80% is because that is what we have been requiring through our development processes to date as things come through the planning board for a permit. We, the time that this ordinance was initially drafted in response to the council order, we knew that the inclusionary zoning ordinance would be forthcoming in 2019, but it would not be in place, that this was the first thing coming forward. So we wanted to at least codify what we were doing through the planning board process already. Regarding the suggestions of increasing that either to 20% or reducing the area median income to something less than 80%, those are all things that we are analyzing right now as part of the inclusionary zoning ordinance that will be submitted to you the first part of this year, actually. We're now 2019. And part of that, what I do want to just say, the 10% at 80% is kind of the standard that communities use, but what we're doing through our process now is really trying to right-size that to Salem's marketplace, so that we can with confidence say that we can require 10% at 50%, and that the private sector developers are going to be able to deliver that. I do want to just put this in the context that this is just one way that affordable housing can be provided. This is looking at someone who is doing a for-profit market deal that we're requiring. They do something more than just pure market. We're requiring them to do affordable housing. The work that Mickey Northcutt and the Harbor Light development, that's different. That's a different model. They are focused on providing affordable housing, using different financing tools to deliver those. And then, a third area is what the Public Housing Authority owns and operates and potentially could develop as well. So what we're talking about through this ordinance before you tonight is what private sector folks would be delivering. And rather than just making everything pure market rate, we're requiring 10%. What we want to do, though, is come forward with you in the coming months with a right-sized ordinance that will, again, be tailored to this marketplace so that we can be smart about what the requirements are that we're providing for affordable housing. But I'm very, very pleased to hear the level of public input regarding affordable housing and the importance of the community.
Let me ask you, the requirement or the suggestion for Salem resident requirement, would that even be legal?
So, Mr. President, that's getting to the Fair Housing Act and fair housing, where You can't have residency requirements. There are certain projects where you can have preferences that are indicated, but a requirement is not something that's allowed.
The suggestion to make this ordinance not a floating area, but to make it clean with actual zones of what properties we want, and that would be the zones. Is that something that's possible?
So I think...
rather than the overlay zone, to make it an actual line on the plan.
So, Mr. President, what we, and this was touched on in some of the public comment, we're trying to establish standards for the properties and classes for the properties that would come in, that would fall under this ordinance in order to not single out specific properties that could create a challenge, an appearance, or be litigated as spot zoning. So that's why we've taken the approach in this ordinance.
We heard from at least 10 or 12 people that the Historic Commission approval should be required if we can have the planning board address that in their deliberations. Or would you like to comment on it?
So I do want to just be clear, because some of the comments from the public were talking about the Historic Commission recommendation not being required. And I'm not certain, but I wonder if sometimes people were mixing the word recommendation with approval. So I just want to be clear that the ordinance does require that the Historical Commission make a recommendation if the property is outside of the Historic Commission's jurisdiction. If it's within their jurisdiction within a historic district, their approval is still required. That process is not any different. What we were trying to do in this ordinance is say, well, if the property is outside a district, we want the Historical Commission involved. And so it's expanding the Historical Commission to pick up other properties, but where it's outside their district, where they have jurisdiction, it's the flow is as a recommendation to the planning board, who's kind of owning the whole process and oversight.
I'm trying to touch upon the highlights of what people had to offer, and there was a lot of repetition, but there were some that were unique. With regard to the need for a minimum lot area per dwelling for existing buildings, and also for new construction, the 500-foot should be changed to 3,500 or to the underlying zone.
Sure. So thank you for, again, and I suspect that this was addressed before I was in the room. The model that we were looking at for the minimum lot area is what was in the B5, where there has been a lot of reuse of existing properties, where if it's an existing building, there's no minimum lot area requirement. That's been managed by other factors on the property. And for new construction, we again mirrored what was under the B5 at 500 square feet to allow for some flexibility in putting the development scenario together, understanding that there are other constraints that the site has, by other requirements that are in the ordinance, such as the lot coverage, providing parking, etc. I think the suggestion of using 3,500 square feet, which is what is in the NRCC, from one perspective makes sense, because in our efforts we were trying to tie this ordinance to other things that were already approved. So as Amanda mentioned, the commercial uses were taken from the NRCC with a couple of additions that had been suggested. As I referenced, we were looking at the B5 as a model for parts of it. The 3,500 square feet lot area per dwelling unit is something that has not worked in the NRCC in terms of actually being people developing projects that complied with that. All of the residential development that has occurred has sought relief for that because they haven't been feasible development scenarios. And so I have a table, I don't have it with me. So then rather than at 3,500 square feet, it's been a range of, something between 1,000 to 2,000 square feet in that range. So I don't think that calling out the 3,500 square feet is a square footage that makes sense in this application. But I'm sure that's something that the planning board will deliberate on, and, they have the benefit of looking at lots of projects over many years throughout the city and can provide that perspective.
A couple more points real fast. While we're on numbers, the 500-foot, same as the B5, that it's too little. Why don't you talk about the 500-foot, please?
Yes, so as I mentioned, Mr. President, the 500 square foot lot area per dwelling unit requirement in the B5 is for new construction.
Yes. Okay. Under the construction, to clarify that this applies to both freestanding and to new additions, can we clean up the wording of the ordinance?
There may be, Mr. President, there may be a tweak we can make to make that clear. It is the intent that it is, whether it's an addition to the building or if it's new freestanding, new construction. We can look at that language, and again, I think that's something that the planning board in their review can see if there's a tweak to that language that would make things clearer.
The last issue, if we can just speak to parking a little bit more. I don't think you've spoken to parking yet. With the 1,000 feet to parking garages and the overall density being increased, the net increase in parking will go up. Talk to us about parking.
Yeah, so, Mr. President, happy to talk about parking, and parking is always, an important issue that many people have cars and they know about parking and are aggravated by not being able to park where they want to park and being concerned about parking overrun. I do want to note that all of the properties that are within the B5 district already, that the parking requirement, again, the parking requirement under the ordinance before you is modeled under the parking requirements of the B5. So if it's an existing structure that's being reused for housing, it's one space per unit, and it can be provided within a municipal facility or a private facility within 1,000 feet. So someone had raised the Bridge at 211 as a possible beneficiary of this provision in this ordinance. That's available to that property already today because they're within the B5 zone. I think the property that would be able to take advantage of this using a municipal facility would be Immaculate Conception. Actually, both garages are available to meet that requirement if that were pursued. The number of passes that are utilized that are required to be purchased by housing projects within the urban renewal, that is known. We know how many parking passes are required. We know how many parking passes are sold. We know, who's buying them and how they're being utilized. There's a wealth of data thanks to the technology that was implemented in the garages to be able to monitor and track those things. David Kruchowski, taking over from Matt Smith in the Traffic and Parking Department, will be looking at, that data, is looking at that data on an ongoing basis to look at the utilization and how that changes over time and where there may be changes that will need to be made. I'm not sure if we spoke about parking earlier this evening or not. Okay, the utilization, so there's capacity, generally speaking.
In your opinion, if the last item on this list is if 10% is too low of affordability, what is too high? What's a good number to be at? And the 80% mean income is also too high. Is 50% better, in your opinion?
Yeah, so, Mr. President, I'll answer that for you, if I may, in a couple of months when we're back after we've done the full analysis, because I don't want to say something that I haven't looked at the data. We're working with MAPC now, so I don't want to say something that's not informed.
Yes, but the ordinance is before us now, so we can get a recommendation back to us within our timeline?
Mr. President, no, we won't have that analysis done. Again, what we see this as is this is the minimum, and when the inclusionary housing ordinance comes before you, as that goes through its own review process, which will mirror this process, At the end of that process, whatever those requirements are, would be what would govern for the city. Your vote, assuming that you were to vote to adopt an inclusionary zoning ordinance, would sort of replace the affordable provision in this ordinance.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Councilor Fiore.
President, could we have the mayor come up if she wants to conclude? Any comments?
Good idea, thank you. Mayor Driscoll, if you would.
Thanks, everyone. Been a long night. I appreciate everyone's patience and the opportunity to come before you and offer you a few closing remarks. You know, I think at the last meeting, we heard loud and clear there were some concerns about certain aspects of the ordinance. We offered at that time to close the public hearing and work with the planning board to sort of deliberate on those. That was not the wishes of the council. We did take the time to make some additional adjustments. You heard about them this evening. Obviously dialing back the new construction concerns that we've heard, tweaking some of the language. What I've heard today, there's certainly still issues of disagreement with respect to things like historic commission approval, design review board approval. We think those are valuable recommendations, but we really also want to say how much we appreciate having a comprehensive process to review projects. When I look at the planning board, the qualifications, the time, the attention to detail, it's second to none. As I talked about at the last meeting, I've yet to find a project, and certainly in recent history, that I would look at and go, ooh, I wish we didn't do that. I think they've done an excellent job spearheading that information, layering it in, and coming up with projects that work for our community and are being, vital to the redevelopment. I guess I also want to say we spend a lot of time thinking about housing. Tom mentioned some of the work that's underway already. We're going to be filling up your plate with respect to housing policies. We spent a considerable amount of time on Saturday talking about policies and priorities for 2019, and I heard a lot of headlined by housing. I think we had a lot of commonality there. Tomorrow will be the first council meeting of the year, one down, right? 18 more to go, and I am conscious of the urgency around housing. So I want to say something that nobody else has said yet in this public hearing, and that is we need housing. Oftentimes when new housing is proposed in this city, there's pushback. There are folks who are concerned about it, rightfully so, and I think we have a fairly thoughtful process to try and address that growth when it's happening. We're talking about housing options in existing buildings, vacant, dormant, oftentimes dilapidated. I'm worried if these projects don't get developed in your neighborhood, in our community. We need to think about how we can expedite that from happening. It's not getting any easier. Historic adaptive reuse is awesome a job as I think Salem has done at it. Anyone knows who has been around long enough. These projects are not easy. I can count how many times that jail did not get done, but for a lot of work and effort and time. I think the economy's softening. We're heading to a point where it might be harder to make these numbers work. And the time that projects take is significant in Salem. I value that. I think it makes them better. But I think we need to be conscious about not making a decision, not advancing things is a decision. It's a decision to leave those properties in a condition that's not doing anybody any good, not helping meet the dire housing demands that we have. I want to get this right, but I don't think we should allow perfection and time to delay any further. We can work on deliberations. We've got smart people around the table. It will come back to you. There is ample opportunity for public comment once it comes back to you. It's the state law. There's a requirement why we can't have additional public comment once the public hearing is closed with the planning board. But anything on your agenda as elected officials is fair game. There's probably going to be some things that we're still just not going to have an agreement with. We think a recommendation is fine from DRB and Historic Commission. We value that. We want it, but let it work through the planning board, not separate, duplicate process and timeline there. So that's not something we're probably going to reach an accord on. It'll come to you with some sort of a recommendation, and the 11 of you will have to referee on where that suggestion will end up. But I'm really concerned that we have a lot on our plate, a lot of needs. We started this process in June. You passed your order in June. We're now just getting to the point where we might have something that we can send to the planning board that can then come back to you that hopefully you don't open up another public hearing or a long committee process on, and we can take a vote on. Because coming up behind that is inclusionary housing and looking at other options and policies and menus that are going to take time, and we're going to have rooms packed like this to talk about what makes sense. So I'm anxious, and I'm anxious because the need is so great and the time takes so long. District Court, who remembers when we started District Court? Right, a long time ago. They're just going to be getting ready to demolish that site and maybe start construction soon after, beginning of second quarter, and then it's a year-long construction process. So I'm calling that out because I'm feeling the pressure from people who are being forced out of Salem, people who want to stay in Salem, people who have too much of a house and want to downsize, they want options. We don't know exactly what these properties are going to turn into. I, like you, am grateful that we have the CDC interested, working with church officials on those particular properties, because I think it will add a greater amount of affordability. I'd love to maximize it in other ways, but I don't want to create so many hurdles and so much time delays and so many issues and concerns that it actually diminishes the capacity for these properties to get redeveloped. Every time we have to ask for relief and come in and go before ZBAs, it's time, it's money, and it makes these projects harder. And I can assure you, these projects are hard enough. The CDC was partnering up with a private sector developer who took one look at the condition of these properties and said, we're out. The old senior center on Broad Street, beautiful building, definitely in need of some TLC, I think it's safe to say. 3 proposals, that's it, 3. We are fooling ourselves if we think this is easy. We need a process, we need to be fair, and we need to trust the people that serve on these boards who have expert qualifications, take the time to get this done. But putting up hurdles to make that process possible because of some, what I consider to be somewhat red herrings, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. That's a decision we're making to make it more difficult to use existing infrastructure. The one area where I would like to think there's common agreement that we want those properties reused and put back into a productive use. And we need to figure out the parking, we need to figure out how to make sure they're not developed in a way that's incompatible with the neighborhood. We're not anywhere near that. We're just trying to get a pathway. And this idea that we had old pathways were use variances that probably didn't even exist under that zoning. Certainly don't exist under current zoning. There is no existing pathway. The pre-existing non-conforming uses are long abandoned with these properties. They're vacant, they don't exist. This is it, it's up to us. We talked about this on Saturday. We have representative democracy. We get to do the hard work, the due diligence, the listening, the hearing all of the opinions, and then deciding what are we gonna do. And it's up to us to decide whether we want to really think about tackling housing. This is one example, I think, of many we're going to have throughout the year. So I appreciate all the time and all the input, but I'm going to share with you, we have to press go if we're serious about tackling housing. And I hope that we're committed to do that as a partnership and an effort that's not go fast, go crazy, but go deliberately, rely on the people that we have working on these issues, and expect that we're going to be able to get projects done with people who care, volunteering their time. All right, the 11 and 12 of us are getting some payment for being here, right? Staff works here. These folks are volunteers who spend a lot of time tediously going through projects. And I want to say thank you for your second public hearing being here, but also for the work you do all the time. And I think we're there. I hope you'll vote to close the public hearing so we can move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Any additional comments from the planning board? Any comments from the city council? We've heard a lot of testimony to keep the public hearing open. We've heard testimony to close the public hearing. I want to point out that our last meeting on this was nearly 4 weeks ago, 27 days ago, and we received the edited revisions to this ordinance yesterday afternoon at about 3:30 or so. I didn't have time to read it until today, so I really incensed looking at it for the first time today. Well, I don't have a problem with any of the changes that the planning department has made. I think they're very, very good. I'm wondering, what is the will of the body? Do we look to make some of the changes? And I applaud everybody here who spoke, because every request was pretty reasonable on both sides. So thank you all for speaking. Councilor Torrio.
Well, we'll see what the will of the body is. I will make the motion to close the public hearing and refer the matter to the planning board.
Second.
You with me? On the motion of Council Terrell, seconded by Council Fury. All those in favor? All those opposed? The ayes have it. Council McCarthy.
Councilor Terrell made the motion twice, but I'll say, I further move that the matter be referred to the planning board for their recommendation.
All those in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it. Council Fury.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. President.
Motion was adjourned at, I believe that's 10:50.
9:48.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight.